was very powerful. And in fact, I understand you've actually met Margriet yourself.
Yes, I met her last year in Milan when I went for the Fix festival, and we had a lot of interaction, discussions. In fact, as a group, we even watched this documentary, and I thought it was a very, very powerful message. You know, and I think people have now accepted that mental health is here, and we need to talk about it instead of avoiding the subject and taking it as a taboo.
Exactly,
you know,
because
it's very important.
Mental health has always had stigmatization attached to it, but it's mental health. That's what it is. It's mental health. You have physical health, you have mental health. And in fact, that leads us to our next panel. And this is the effects of mental health and challenges in sports. And we have Margriet herself, is a panelist. As you well know, she's a former athlete in short track speed skating. She was a member of the Dutch national team, and after she ended her career as an elite short track speed skater, she experienced there was a lack of aftercare in elite sports. And she founded an online platform in the Netherlands for elite athletes. We're also joined by Mr. Tom OSANJO from Kenya, and he's an award-winning Kenyan journalist with over 2 decades of experience, and he was a 2009 Joel Bells International Media Fellow and 2017 Coaching and Leadership Fellow, which is a program offered by the Media Project and the Ponte Institute. He is currently serving with UN Habitat as Senior Editorial Assistant, and it's important to note that Mr. OSANJO is in here in his personal capacity for the Kenya National Sports Film Festival. He is here in his own personal capacity, and he is not representing UN Habitat in any way, form, manner, or mode. Now, we also have from Jamaica, Mr. Christopher SAMUDA, and he's the president of the Jamaican Olympic Association and Paralympic Association, chairman of the National Chorale of Jamaica, founding partner of the law firm SAMUDA & Johnson, where he's a marketing partner and heads the firm's Sport and Entertainment Department, the Intellectual Property, Patent and Trademarks Department. Then we also have Dr. Syed KARAR, and he's a faculty in both internal medicine and palliative care at Khan University, Nairobi, Kenya. He's also the lead physician for the electronic health record, and he's also an associate professor at the university. He is currently dual board by the American Board of Internal Medicine in both internal medicine and palliative care medicine. He also has a certification from the American Hypertension Society for Management of Hypertension, and he's a fellow of the American College of Physicians and the Royal College of Physicians. And then also we have the chairman.
Yeah, I just want to thank the panelists for coming, especially my friend from Jamaica, to have woken him up very early. They are, I think, about 8 hours behind. So good morning, and I just want to wish the panelists all the best in this very important discussion. Thank you.
Yes. This is the panel on the effects of mental health and challenges in sports. Karibuni.
I really appreciate it. Very nice to meet everyone, and I'll be moderating this session.
We can't hear you.
Welcome, Christopher, Tom, lovely to have you here. And I'll start with Margriet. I just saw the movie yesterday, very touching. It seems like you've been through quite a lot. And maybe the first question that I can ask, and certainly if we have viewers, feel free to post your questions online as well. But could you share with us, if you're comfortable, just your experiences that you had with a very competitive sports and how you dealt with mental health issues as well?
Yeah, true. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me here. Great to see you all. Yeah, actually, the idea of making the documentary, it was actually not my idea to make a documentary about myself, but I experienced there was a lack of aftercare for elite athletes, and it was a graduation project basically, and I thought, like, well, how can I show people how it is to quit the thing you love the most? And that was the reason, for making the documentary. And I attended a documentary workshop and pitched the idea because I wanted to follow 3 athletes and then to show how it is, like, mentally for elite athletes to quit. And then the jury came to me and they said, like, those 3 athletes, it's all fine. But we wanted to make a documentary about you, and I think it's really important to give awareness to this topic. Like, it's not a hobby; it's like a complete lifestyle, And yeah, to make it so personal, I think yeah, it makes it even more yeah, personal, I think.
Yeah, and it looks like you had a very supportive family, which I think contributes a lot to the healing process, identifying the problem, and then, you know, facing the problem head on, it seems like.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And yeah, also the process for my parents, because my father was used to be a farmer, and he was like, if you wanted to work hard, you can help me. You don't have to train. And my mom was really yeah, supportive in my short track speed skating career, and there was also like yeah, sort of yeah, friction maybe, like also like if you talk about balance, my father did it with all his heart, and he wanted to have it the best for me, but he saw me struggling. So yeah, I think it's really important that you get the support in any kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump over to you, Christopher. You know, normally when patients come to me with mental health issues, I'll tell them, listen, why don't you pick up a sport, play some tennis, swim? But it seems like I was reading a study just recently, and about 35% of athletes suffer from some sort of mental health issue. And not only athletes, but coaches. I mean, there was a study done in Britain where 55% of the coaches said we suffer from an active mental health issue, whether it's anxiety, insomnia, depression. What is your experience? I mean, I know you have Usain Bolt there as well, and he stood up quite actively for Naomi Osaka when she kind of declared some mental health issues, and the community just jumped on her. So what are your experiences there in Jamaica and all over the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, given the competitive environment and also the social factors, our athletes have suffered in certain instances, but it is not really a problem in Jamaica because I think we have the support system which comes from the high school. At the high school level, they are exposed to competition at a very early age, so they're able to manage the expectations, they're able to manage their own interests. And they have, of course, a social group at school. You have a guidance counselor. You have, in fact, a strong parent-teachers association, and our parent-teachers associations are very active in terms of sport. And they offer, of course, guidance other than professional, and they also are sports psychologists. So from the very early stage, there is a system of support. So we really don't have that problem as such, but there are cases. And what I have said in relation to those cases is that we have to understand that it is just not simply the athlete, and your statistics have borne them out. There is a coach. A lot of coaches go under a lot of mental stress in terms of their own expectations and also in terms of how they deliver the success of their athletes or their sportsmen and sportswomen. And then also managers as well. So it is what I call a social boutique service. You have to look at the athlete, the coach, the manager, all those persons who interface with the athletes, and then design a system, a program that is, of course, not mutually exclusive, because sometimes we evaluate the athlete, we evaluate the coach, and there is no nexus, although both of them are seeing each other every day and both of them are working in a working environment. So in Jamaica, the Jamaica Olympic Association, we encourage that sort of social boutique service, which we find will help the athlete and help the coach and also the manager in understanding what are the imperatives that have to be in place in order to ensure that each party enjoys a very healthy relationship. And at the end of the day, the athlete is successful.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to jump over to Tom. Tom, I know you do a lot of advocacy work. You know, it's really baffling to me that, you know, even in 2022, almost 2023, there's still such a big stigma around mental health in sports, right? Just mental health in general, and then a notch higher mental health in sports. Why is this? Why are we not tackling this head on? Why is it this barriers against addressing mental health effectively in the athlete world?
Thank you. Maybe I might mention that apart from being a journalist, I also was a sports administrator. I managed a team. The concept we had was that we got young boys and girls who are leaving high school. Then we gave them chance. We train them, and then export them to more established clubs. We were not playing any competitive football, but just mentoring them, because we realized that a lot of talent is lost between high school and college and workplace. So we gave them that chance, and then they transitioned to other clubs. And at one point, 7 of the national football team Harambee Stars players were people who had passed through our program. So I saw a lot of this in young people, the pressures. And now to your question about why the not openness, I think basically talking from African experience, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health. In most cases, people would think maybe you've been bewitched. People also, the whole idea of coming to your clinic, doctor, I'm sure this one, even many of your patients can tell you that they come there with a lot of confidentiality issues. It is very uncommon to find someone publicly saying that, okay, I'm going to see my shrink, because of the stigma around it. So basically, I think the stigma is to fight. And it's culture, and with all things cultural, it's not going to happen tonight or next week. It'll take a lot of things like what we are doing now, talking to the public out there. I've been in the advocacy field now for 2 years, going 3, and because of my own personal experience, because I went through depression, and under depression, I started self-medication, and my self-medication was alcohol. So I ended up being an alcoholic and depressed at the same time, which saw me end up in a rehab. So when I got out, I decided now to be a mental health advocate. And it's funny because you find some people asking you, what kind of a man are you going public with your problems? I don't know where the part of the world where you people come from, but in African context, the male is supposed to be someone strong, so that even when you're hurting, you don't go public. It's a sign of weakness. So basically, I think the biggest problem here we have is cultural attitudes, which feeds into stigma. And also maybe at the workplace, we work in a very competitive environment. If people get to know that you have a mental health issue, maybe it might put a blot on your career progression. So if most people hide this from their bosses and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, and I think many people see this, athletes are these superior beings, these people who do things that a normal human person can't do for most of the time, right? I mean, no one can run. If you ask me to run a 100-meter race, I can't do it in 10 seconds, I mean, but Usain Bolt can do it. So we look at them almost like semi-gods, and so, if they show a sign of weakness by claiming I'm going through depression, or I think what happens is that is this impression that my followers, my following, people who see me, will see me as less inferior. Is that necessarily true?
I think there's some truth in that, because also you've built a brand. You Eliud Kipchoge, you've told the whole world that nothing is impossible. And now tomorrow you come back, you tell people that actually have a mental problem. So you find that after you've built that reputation, anything on the negative, you wouldn't want to talk about it. And also there could be also, I'm not very sure about this, but also the fact of the big corporation behind the athletics. I think maybe a big brand might not want their star athlete to go public and say, I have this problem. I don't know, maybe that's my thought. As the gentleman mentioned earlier, we saw what happened to Naomi when she went public. Instead of sympathy, I think people were all over her. And that's what may make some people fear to go public. But I feel if you would have more Naomi Osakas coming public, it will show that after at the end of it all, we are all human. Whether you're president or you're a star athlete, you can have this mental health issue, and looking for professional help is the best way to go.
Yeah, I can't agree.
So that you're lowered from that pedestal, that you're a semi-god, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That's really helpful. Margriet, I think, you know, as athletes, there's just a lot of pressure to train. I know my son who's in swimming gets up at 5:30 in the morning, is in a cold water pool, swims for an hour and a half. He goes to school, he comes back, he swims. I just can't imagine the amount of stress to perform, and the stress builds up before a competition. I'm assuming that ends up causing a lot of mental health issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly the thing which might cause mental health issues, because as an athlete, we are trained to be strong and not to be weak. So if you face mental health issues, your natural behavior is to be strong, right? So I think it's really important to see it as a training as well. So if you face any struggles or mental health issues, just see it as information where you can learn from. And if you can embrace that feeling for yourself, then it will flow again, and then you will become in your truly strength again. So I think it's really important to just embrace it, and then to talk about it. Like my former speaker also told, like, it's not a weakness. So if you just tell what your issues are, and see it as a training as well. As an athlete, you train physically, but it's also really important.
Right now, what is your advice for everyone?
You're perfectly correct in your assessment, because it has to be systemic. I think what we need to do is to, from the very primary level, build what I call a social net for all young people. And that social net, of course, involves your teachers, involves your parents, involves the home, because the home is, in fact, the first social unit to which the child is exposed. It also involves your parent-teachers association, your past students association. And we have to develop a system whereby, in fact, all of those parties come together and work together, and it will not be a silo experience. So in Jamaica, as I said previously, we have a very strong system at the primary level that conditions the child. But what I also impress our sportsmen and sportswomen and our sport administrators is that concepts are very important. For a child, you have to define success from a very early stage. You have to define concepts of defeat, concepts of failure, so that when the child comes of age, they have that definition, which of course is going to assist them is how they in fact treat certain social situations and certain sports situations. So I've always said that we don't negotiate with defeat. You can't tell the child that there is something that is called defeat, which is part of his DNA or her DNA. There may be disappointments, but you have to make that definition for the child so that they understand that life is not all about winning and losing. There is something in between. And how you handle success and how you handle failure are very important as to how you approach life as a sportsman and sportswoman. Then you go to the secondary level, and that system has to continue. It has to be very structured. It has to be very systemic. And throughout that system, you have to bring all parties together. You cannot have a silo experience, as I said before. And what we have done from an Olympic perspective is to tell our associations, one, you have to have a sports psychologist on board. That's non-negotiable. You have to. But the sports psychologist has to be intimately involved in the life of the sportsman and sportswoman. You can't foist a sports psychologist the day before competition and expect that you are going to have results. So the sports psychologist has to work with the athlete for a long time, and there has to be a sense of comfort between the athlete and the sports psychologist. Then the coach also has to understand the DNA of the psychological DNA of the athlete, and you only get that when you get formal training and technical training. And there are a lot of coaches who feel that they are in fact sports psychologists. We have to disabuse them of that notion and say you need formal training. And that is very important to the success or the failure of the athlete. And then also the manager, because you and I know that athletes come under a lot of pressure when money is not coming into the coffers. And they cannot meet their day-to-day expenses, and they can't even meet their family expenses. And the manager is very important in that in relation to negotiating contracts. The manager has to understand that he has a life in his hands when he's negotiating contracts. And if he does not do that in an appropriate way, there can be adverse circumstances for the athlete. Can't pay his bill, can't support his family, can't support his children, can't go to tournaments, can't go to meets. So it is, in fact, a very consensual approach that we have to take to ensure that at the end of the day, we have positive results for the athlete, who is the primary asset. Without the athlete, and I'm sure Margaret will support me on that, we all wouldn't be here speaking on this topic.
Yeah, just a lot of layers of complexity I see that need to be addressed. Thanks. Tom, you know, I think one of the things that we struggle in Kenya is a difference in the gender. How does gender play a role in mental health, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and maybe even in Jamaica as well? You know, if you, for example, take the role of a woman, you know, they have multiple roles, but then they're playing competitive sports. Do you see a lot more mental health in women compared to men, or we don't know? Just before you answer that, I'll just tell you, I was doing a quick search on our scientific journals, and you know, to all the guests who are here, there is very, very little published on mental health in athletes. I mean, I could find maybe a handful of articles. There's much more published on COVID than there is on mental health and athletes. So yeah, it would be just good to know from you, Tom, is there a difference when it comes to males and females, especially in the African context?
Yeah, of course there is. And what I've seen is, I'm not really checked on the particularly athletes, but from my, when I go around doing my mental health talks, I've found that women have much more better coping mechanisms than men when it comes to mental health issues, because they have so many roles. You're a mother, you're a professional athlete, maybe you're a coach, you have to train, you have to take care of kids and all this, and yet they still go through it. One thing I've come to realize that it's very easy for women to open up among themselves and talk about issues affecting them than men. And I think this sharing of issues help in the healing process or coping mechanism, so that if I am going through something, we call your girlfriends over coffee, over lunch, and then you say, I'm going through this and this. For men, you'll meet for maybe a bottle of beer, and you talk about English football. And meanwhile, deep down, you're hurting. You're not telling the person next to you, this is what I'm going through. And that's why you find, in some cases, most of the, like I've seen in Kenya, after, and I'm very happy with what Margriet is doing, the aftercare for the athletes is very, very rare in Kenya. And more often than not, it's the male athletes who fall off the wagon, because there's no that serious coping mechanism and maybe psychosocial support for them. So in my case, though women have more responsibilities, but they tend to handle mental health challenges much better than men. Thank you.
Thank you. What are your thoughts, Margriet? What is your opinion? You've been through this.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Tom, basically. Really well done said. And I think it's also really important to realize as an athlete that you are more than only an athlete. And I think it's really important to develop yourself as a human being, even during your athlete career. Because if you develop yourself as a human being, you develop yourself as an elite athlete as well. And for many coaches, it's really challenging, because then they think you're busy with something else. It won't help the Olympic dream, for example. But I don't agree with that, because if you again develop yourself as a human being, you will be a more interesting athlete as well. Especially with social media we face nowadays, we can see it as something bad, or that you lose focus, for example. But you can embrace it as well, to expose yourself as a human being, and then it attracts sponsors, it attracts partners, and you don't need the media anymore. So I think, again, if you look at that situation as information as well, to learn from and to have new possibilities, then everything can be an opportunity.
Yeah, can't agree more. Margaret, there's one thing that you mentioned in your video that caught my attention. It was the ability of not staying fit. So the body dysmorphic kind of disorder once you maybe take a break from sports. How realistic is that? How many of the athletes really worry about that? How much of that plays a role in their mental health?
Yeah, I think, well, at the time I quit my elite athlete career, it was almost 10 years ago, and there was not any guidance of a good aftercare, basically. So you get the support to the top, and once you are there and you say I quit, then you need to find out yourself. And I think it's really important to I think it's getting better, luckily, but I think it's really good to pay attention to it, that it's really important to do some deep training and to get your body fit, or to stay your body fit even when you quit your elite athlete career.
Yeah. And you know, Christopher mentioned something very interesting, which I hadn't thought of as well, is just the sports psychologist. Did you have that sports psychologist on when you were training, and were you open to going to meet them if you had them on the team, or was that a concept you were not exposed to? That's for you, Margriet.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Sorry, what was the question?
You know, Christopher had mentioned the role of a sports psychologist, and you know, someone professional, not your manager, not your coach, but someone who's really got the official qualified training, whereby then the athlete can go and meet and do a little bit of decompression and all that stuff. Were you ever exposed to a sports psychologist, and if yes, were you open to meeting them?
Yeah, I was, and I think it's also really personal. For one athlete thinks it's really good to have a mental coach. Another person prefer somebody who trusts. So I think it doesn't have to be per se a mental coach, for example. It can also be someone else who has lots of experience, or a former athlete who knows exactly everything you face. So I think if you, as an athlete, find the right people around yourself, I think that's the most important thing.
And you felt open to meeting, you didn't feel pressured or embarrassed to meet the psychologist. You welcomed that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but at the time I wanted to make the documentary. The first thing my teacher told me was like, Margriet, why are you going to make a documentary about yourself? And why are you going to make a documentary about failure? Because you failed, right?
Wow.
And that was something for me, like, whoa, it always have to be, or it always have to go perfect, and it's always have to be right, and all things like that. But there's another side of the medal as well. And I think it's so important to give awareness to the other side, and not as yeah, as a bad thing, or to give someone that someone did something wrong, but just to again to get information to learn from.
Sure, and I think Christopher said this quite well, that I think the way they train from very young, it's not all about winning, but to accept defeat and maybe enjoy the participation in the sport. I mean, that seems to be the bottom line as well. So, Christopher, what I, I think COVID has been here for about 2.5 years now and has had a huge impact on the mental health of just the general population. How has it affected the athletes as well? Because I'm assuming playing sports, especially contact sports, was probably reduced, stopped for many, many months. People were at home. Have you seen any mental health pandemics increases in the athletes' world with COVID?
Yeah, but certainly we had some issues in Jamaica. The athletes' regime was disrupted. They weren't able to earn. They weren't able to interface in their natural environment, coaches, friends, and so on. So for some, they went through a lot of challenges. And what we had indicated to them is that, look, this is a natural occurrence. It is affecting everybody globally. You are not unique. And therefore, you have to develop first personal systems in order to deal with that. But you're not alone. You have your mental coach, you have your sports psychologist, you have your family. And we, in fact, had several meetings with our athletes in order to sensitize them that this is a global phenomenon that affects everybody and that it too will pass. And therefore, we have to develop mechanisms of self, mechanisms of environment, social mechanisms in order to come out of this phenomenon without any adverse consequences at all. In terms of the Paralympic movement, of which I am president in Jamaica, we had a sports psychologist on board long before, and therefore he developed programs with our athletes for this very social environment of the pandemic. So it wasn't a question that he was introducing to our athletes for the first time mechanisms to cope, coping mechanisms. He just simply said, you are familiar with them, let us now put them into play. And this is something that we have to learn in sports in particular. We have to be preventive rather than curative. So we have to see these things far off and ensure that our athletes are exposed to systems professionally and otherwise to deal with these occurrences. Yes, I know that it is not going to be perfect, and there might be nuances that perhaps we have never thought about. But certainly, if we have a preventive approach, particularly to these things, then we will see the results. What we have done also in Jamaica is to say to our athletes, it is a time. The pandemic has offered you a lot of opportunities. One, to evaluate self, one, to evaluate the environment, and also to test your coping skills. So don't look or view it as something that is adverse. Look at it as an opportunity to hone your social skills in terms of coping with your environment and coping with your coach. Look at it as an opportunity also from an association's point of view to ensure that you have risk policies in place that of course will involve the athlete and the athlete's welfare. Because a lot of associations, I find, do not have risks policies in place, which are humanized, which deal with the human being, and the human being is at the center of your risk policy. And therefore, if you have these policies as an association in place, and everybody's au fait with those policies, then you will be able to see better results when a pandemic hits you, and you will be able to salvage what persons may perceive to be losses. So in Jamaica, we were able to deal with it, I think, relatively well, but there were issues that needed our microscopic attention, and we dealt with them as best as we could.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Tom, I'm going to move to you, and I'm going to ask this question of all of you as well. So I'm an athlete. I'm dealing with depression in Kenya and in the Netherlands, in Jamaica, all over the world. Where do I go? What do I do? Tom, let's start with you. I'm in Kenya. I'm running a marathon. I'm not feeling well. I don't want to turn to alcohol. I'm not sleeping well. What do I do? Who do I talk to? Is there a number I can call? Is there someone I can speak to in confidentiality, in privacy?
I think since COVID started, a deliberate effort by the National Olympic of Kenya Committee, NOC, to avail mental health. Mental health has become a topic that athletes are invited almost on a monthly basis to share the experiences. And I think they also have a desk. I'm not very sure, but I think they have a desk where any athlete who's having mental health issue can call confidentially. But there's no harm in walking to a Aga Khan hospital to come see you, doctor. There's no there's no stigma. It's okay. It's like going to see your dentist, going to see your gyna, and if we manage to overcome this stigma, the athlete will be very much able. I've not spoken closely with the guys running the athletics in Kenya, but one thing, if I get a chance, is to pass this message to them, to tell the athlete that it is okay not to be okay. But it's okay not to be okay, and if you're not okay, look for help before it is too late. Because because most athletes, that's their only livelihood. They're not like my friend here who is the president of Jamaica Olympic Association, and he has a law firm. So if one fails, he can fall back on the other. But for these guys, this is their life. This is all their life what they depend on, and it's good that we tell them it's okay to look for help because your future depends on it. And in Africa, as you know very well, if one is successful, he brings on board about 10 family members. If one person's success depends on 10 or more people. If this person goes down, 10 people go down.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. How about you, Margriet? Where should I go? I mean, you're in Europe. I think the resources are a lot more available than they might be in Africa. We struggle with resources here. Our healthcare systems are quite fragile. I'm assuming that you have a lot more resources than probably Tom would have. So where would we go if we're having these issues?
Yeah, I think because of athletes talk more about it, they became a sort of role models, and that's why the Dutch Olympic National Committee start a program. And as an athlete, you can call them or email them or talk to them. So I think that's really good, and that's the start of getting the support they need. But still, there is like a sort of barrier to call the big Olympic committee, right? So I think it's really important, those conferences like what we are doing now. I think it's really important to give awareness to mental health, and that, like Tom already said, like it's okay to not be okay. And I think if we spread that word, that athletes feel safe to talk about their issues.
Yeah. What about you, Christopher? What would we do if we were suffering from mental health and we wanted to seek some anonymous care?
Yes. Mm-hmm. If I may be permitted just to step back a bit, to whom you go and where you go will be a function of your social upbringing. So if a child is exposed or a teenager is exposed to a sports psychologist, a mental coach, a guidance counselor, that child has options as to whom he must go. And this is why I'm saying it is very important that from an early stage, we not only define concepts, but we give children options so that they, at an early stage, can understand that there are many persons that will offer them support. Who would I go to? This is now a responsibility of the association, the Olympic Association, the Sport Association. The Sport Association must make available to the athlete several options. The athlete may very well be comfortable with the coach, and the coach may very well interface with the athlete in a far more positive way than a professional. But the Sport Association has to give the athlete options. Where will he or she go? They may very well go to the coach because they have developed a rapport with the coach, they have developed a sensitivity and emotional intelligence with the coach. They, however, may find a mental coach that is far more positive for them because they see the coach every day. And if you're not accustomed to having that positive relationship with the coach and speaking with the coach on certain personal issues that affect your performance, then you have the option of going to a mental coach. What we find, however, in Jamaica is that the coach-athlete relationship is very close. So the first port of call is always a coach, always a coach. But we have said an athlete must have options. You only know the value of somebody else when you have that person as an option. So in Jamaica, a lot of our athletes touch base with the coach first. But we have now introduced the sports psychologist, the mental coach, the guidance counselor, so that our athletes will have options in selecting where do they go when they have a difficulty. And something that I'd like to say, which may be an oversimplification of the matter, we say as an apex body to our administrators, coaches, and athletes, going and speaking to a sports psychologist and our mental coach is not to make you well. Is to prevent you from getting sick. It may be an oversimplification, but that's very important.
Sure.
You are not sick, but you go to a sports psychologist to ensure that you maintain that stability. You are able to increase your coping skills, your social skills in order to deal with your environmental factors.
Wow, thanks guys. I have a ton of questions on my WhatsApp. It's ringing like it's never rung before, but I think we are up in terms of time. And I really wanted to thank all of you. I mean, you know, sometimes we need platforms like this to talk about this and just normalize these conversations. So I'm very thankful to the organizers. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. Lots of messages on my phone saying thank you to all of you. And I'm going to hand back to the organizers and have a lovely morning or an afternoon or an evening, wherever you are. Thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And
Okay,
you are a good moderator.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Wow. After about 54 films, 13 panels, finally, Kenya International Sports Film Festival 2022 Hybrid Edition is coming to an end. But not yet.
One more movie.
Exactly.
One movie, yeah.
But this was a very, very, very informative panel. Very interesting. Very sobering.
Yes, indeed. I think all the panel discussions we had over the last 4 days have been extremely powerful, and what came out is that we got the experts of every subject to talk. You know, and I really want to thank this panel, starting with the moderator, Dr. KARAR, who seemed to have done brilliant research.
Yes.
With his informative and very good questions, leading on to some very important answers that we can. And of course, I want to thank Tom OSANJO for his valuable contribution, and my two good friends whom I met at FIX in Milan last year, Margriet and Christopher. I really want to thank Christopher because I know the time difference. You know, there's about 8 hours in Jamaica, and also to thank him being in such a high position as the president of Jamaica Olympic, for him to come and share his valuable information, and Marguerite for having, you know, having gone through it, having gone through the mental challenges as a sports person, and we did discuss quite a few things, and the documentary revealed quite a bit. So I think it's nothing wrong in expressing when you don't feel right. So thank you to all of them.
It's okay to not be okay.
It's absolutely not okay not to be.
and one thing that actually came across very clearly is, and was very surprising, is that, thank you very much, Mr. Christopher SAMUDA. He feels that your first line of defense is your coach.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, because that's the one you're related to very closely. You know, so that's the person who really knows your ins and outs, or your moods you are in, or when he can push you, when he needs to lighten up. So that's a very special relationship.
Well, coming up next is a movie about a very special relationship between a coach and a player, and that is Invisible from Italy. That is going to be the last film for this series.
Sadly, sadly the last. But all good things must come to an end.
Yes, but then again, we still have the awards.
Oh yes, we're looking forward to that from our head jury.
Exactly.
And that should be after the movie.
Exactly. So until then, you're watching the Kenya International Sportsman Festival 2022, the hybrid edition, the 5th in the series, and until our judging ceremony, our jury ceremony, enjoy.